Alright, first video on a new channel. Figure I'll do all the doom and gloom stuff here just because it's really just speculating stuff, and it's probably of minimal interest because it's just one man's opinion kind of thing, trying to figure out what's going to happen, you know, try to predict the future, how this whole thing's going to unravel, and where the you know, I don't even know if it matters. I mean, there's no real point in identifying you know, what match is going to set the whole thing on fire, or exactly when the fire is going to get started, or how you're going to get burned, because you will get burned. So anyway, just thinking about it, I mean, it's sort of now official. I mean, the government has decided that the currency's got to go down. It's going to destroy it. I mean, it's borrowing money. There's just no way it can finance the debt that's been borrowed. They keep artificially putting off inflation by keeping interest rates on borrowed money at you know, cheap, so people can just keep borrowing money to finance their subsistence, and it just can't work. It's impossible. And so you have this system where obviously there's people holding the paper that says has the IOU written on it, and they're going to try to extract the value that they're owed. And is there any possible way that that can be done? I mean, is there any, you know, mechanism that makes it possible for these IOUs to ever be, for the money to actually cycle through and satisfy them all? I would argue there's nowhere to extract the productivity to pay back that money, especially when the economy and industrial production and all this stuff is just going to completely crash because of the lack of there's no real consumer dollars to finance it. It was all financed on debt, and the borrowing capacity has been reached. And so now the government is accepting all the liabilities for all those bad borrowing, and you know, that it's not going to resolve it by accepting the liability. That's not going to undo the existence of it. So now the government's just going to become the landlord, and it's going to start evicting people from their life. And you know, it's going to get ugly because the government's also taking care of people with Social Security and other programs, and all that's got to stop because there's going to be no money. Revenues next year are going to go way down. Okay, there's not going to be any capital gains to tax. We don't tax wealth in this country, so all we tax is income, and incomes are going to be way down. People are going to be writing off all their losses, and we've just borrowed another, you know, whatever the new liability is. I mean, some of it's just on paper liability so far. It won't be paid out yet. It'll be paid out some future date. So it's debt that isn't even going to be registered as debt. But at any rate, I mean, you're talking about trillions of dollars that are going out, and we're going to have a trillion less coming in at least. And so it's insane. It's completely broken. It's fucked. And so I mean, the decision is going to be when is inflation going to be allowed? When is all this old inflation, this built-up inflation, going to be allowed to exist, to wipe out this unsustainable liability? And it seems to me that the way the government's functioning is that it's going to hold it off until the rich can try to retain their money, retain the value of their assets, and then they'll let it loose. You know, so once the stock market goes down far enough, then they'll decide to say something like, we're not going to issue bonds anymore to pay off, you know, to finance debt. We're just going to print more money. And so all money will start getting devalued, and so you'll start having inflation, you know, 10% a year, 15, 20, 30, 40. I mean, they're going to have to be huge numbers, percentage-wise, to wipe out all the debt that exists. And in doing that, you're sort of picking between two populations. There's no way the people who have borrowed the money can pay it back. But should they be given a free ride through inflation to get rid of their debt, at the expense of the poor sucker who lived responsibly and saved some money? Because inflation is going to destroy the value of savings. So I mean, it's going to get really sloppy and ugly, because people who did the right thing are going to get hurt, and people who did the wrong thing are basically going to get a free ride, because they're going to be able to keep the assets they basically stole from the future. And those assets, whether it be a flat screen TV or some other thing, are going to retain their value because there won't be any new production to replace those items. It's like cars are going to become more valuable, used ones. That market's going to, be accelerated because of the fact that demand's still going to exist to some extent. And so people who borrowed money to finance something like that will gain value. They'll retain the value of that thing they borrowed the money that basically ultimately destroyed the economy. But anyway, no point in going through all the who's going to win, who's going to lose, who should win or lose, because it's never about shoulds. Reality just turns out to be about what's going to happen, not about what should happen. So I mean, the question is there any energy, or is there any motivation, or is there any force that'll force the government to take real responsibility for what's going to happen and ensure that it can't happen? Like, there's just basics that have to be secured. I mean, food and energy, the two, and then, keeping people in their houses. And so they could impose some sort of wage and price controls to just establish that, to prevent the inflation part. They can destroy the value of the money, but as long as they retain its value in the economy, it wouldn't matter. That's where it's going to get tricky, because if you can keep the price of food stable, and you can stop people from hoarding it, or stop the necessity, people feeling the motivation to hoard it, because that's when things will really start, I suppose, to get really ugly, is when we start hoarding, when people start hoarding things like food. Then there's going to be, like there was with oil a few months ago, there's going to be this huge demand that's going to be way above current supply, and that's just going to make prices go insane. And in that environment, parts of the world are going to start starving big time. Parts of the world that have nuclear bombs, which is going to make things really really ugly, because it's going to be easy. They'll start blaming each other, and they'll start seeing other people's assets as assets they have a right to. And so World War III, here we come. I mean, it's going to get bad once that happens, because that's sort of a basic. I mean, once inflation hits the price of food, we're fucked. And I think that'll happen, though, eventually, because that'll be the only safe haven for money. The only thing that's going to have any real value is going to be these commodities again. It's going to go back to a commodity-based economy, because the money, no one's going to want dollars anymore. All right, they're going to just be, there'll be something. If you take $1 and you have the prospect that dollar could lose 20% of its value in the next 6 months, it's not going to mean anything to you. You want something you can put on the shelf that'll retain its value. You're not going to want to get paid in a thing that's, you're not going to be able to trade with the same value tomorrow. And so, the people are going to have no choice but to put dollars into commodities, and that's when the inflation will be. That's when the inflation will really start. I mean, it'll just feed on itself through that principle. And but the whole bottom line is I mean, I don't really want to make this about economics, but the bottom line is this is the class war. I mean, it's the rich are going to destroy this economy. The whole concept of making money on money, having money just grow by itself, without doing anything productive, was insane. It can't work. It never has worked in the past, and now it still doesn't work. The consolidation of wealth is the evil that the human race just couldn't escape, and it will be the doom of the human race, the doom of civilization anyway. If human beings live as monkeys, monkeys with guns, yeah, big deal. So we'll revert to the planet of the apes. And from my perspective, it's, it might as well be over. I mean, there's no point in living in such a world, I don't think, from my perspective. So, from my perspective, I mean, if my hand was on the press the nuke button, I'd probably press it. So, I mean, you know, if I'm going to do it, there's going to be somebody else who would be willing to do it. So you're fucked.
So you can think, you know, no one's going to do anything against their own self-interest and all this other crap. No, because when it's over, it's over. And people just do the fatalistic doomsday scenario. They just say, fuck it, I'd rather have doomsday than what we're heading for. Because they'll see the writing on the wall. I don't think people aren't going to want to go back to a world where they're owned, where they're slaves to, you know, kings and castles and all that kind of crap. It's just, there's no way people are going to accept that as their future. So, anyway, just throwing the first of these out, just trying to figure out what's going to happen, how it's going to all unravel. And it's really hard to predict because it all just kind of depends on how the system reacts to its failures, what government does. And I guess government's going to be the big player. I mean, the rich have some power, but they only have power through that government and government policy. So, anyway, just volume 1 for no good reason whatsoever. Just rambles on doom.